Okay, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to download your data from Qualtrics and produce some simple analyses of your results. So here I am in the Qualtrics home page or project page. I'm going to select my survey that I created in the session we saw before. Then I'm going to go to data and analysis here. And now Qualtrics may take a little while, say it's loading the data. Here are my data. Now I'm going to say export and import. I'm going to export the data. And if you know how to use SPSS and have experience with that, you probably want to download it in SPSS format and take it from there. I'm going to use for this, however, Excel. And now very important is to select more options. And there are a couple things we need to set here. First, we need to download numeric values. So rather than having cells, values that say things like strongly agree, we'll have 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, so we can average them. And then most important is I need to select the export viewing order data for randomized survey options. May not sound like it, but what that does is it downloads information about which condition was displayed to your experimental respondents. So we have that checked, and we click download. Qualtrics works for a little while and then downloads the data. So here it is. I'm going to open it up in Excel. All right, so here it is. I'm going to enable editing. Awesome. So now each column is a different data field. We can see the date that people started and ended their survey, the IP address that they took it from, how far they got through the survey, how long they took on it, whether they finished the survey, the date that the results were recorded, and so on and so forth. I'm going to scroll on over. The first thing I'm going to notice is the distribution channel, preview or anonymous. These previews are from times that I previewed my survey while I was creating it, so it's not real data. So I'm going to want to select all of those columns all the way over on the column over here with the numbers. I select them, and then I can click delete to get rid of the preview data. Now I've just got my real data. Now continuing along, Qualtrics helpfully widens the column to try to display the entire column heading. The problem is that some of those end up being really wide. So I'm going to select the actual data columns here and then narrow those a bunch just so we can see everything we want on the screen. Whoops. And you know what? I'm just going to delete this column because this is just question 1, which is actually the consent agreement, so I don't actually need people's replies to that. So I've gotten rid of that. Okay, so now I've got my data, and widen that column so we can see it. So here we've got favorability. This is the question that asks people how favorable they were toward Taylor Swift. 1 was very unfavorable, 3 was neutral, 5 was highly favorable, and so on. The next column is would you vote for her? 1s, 2s, and 3s. I don't actually remember how those are coded, but I can go back to my survey and check. And then party identification. 1s are Democrats, 2s are Republicans, 3s are independents, 4s are other. These cells have whatever text people entered in if they selected other. I'm going to get rid of these columns as well because those are just empty. And then most importantly, I've got the usefully named FL6 block randomizer display order. This shows which of the 3 experimental conditions actually got shown to my respondents, so that's going to be critical for the analysis. I can sort my data right here. I'll say sort A to Z. Now I've got the data. The data are ordered with everyone who had the control condition, everyone who had the experiment, the condition with endorsement and a picture of Taylor Swift, and everyone who had just the endorsement without the picture. I'm going to relabel this column as condition, I'm going to relabel this column as favorable, and I'm going to relabel this column as vote, and this column as party ID. So I've given them nice, easy to read, fairly short labels here. Now I want to do my analysis. So the main analysis I want to do is compare the favorability scores, the average favorability for people in the control condition compared to people in the endorsement with the picture condition, and compared to the endorsement without the picture condition. I want those three averages. The most straightforward way to do that in Excel is to use what Excel calls a pivot table or a pivot chart. Those are what a statistician would call a cross tabulation. So I'm going to select a spot just down here below my data or to the side of my data. Doesn't really matter if you had more data. Of course, this list would be longer, so perhaps I'll put it over here. Now I'm going to say Insert, and now go over to Pivot Chart, and I'm going to select a little down arrow and select Pivot Chart and Pivot Table. So this will include both a table and a chart with the results that I construct. So we do that. Now it's asking we need to select a table or range. In other words, I have to select all the data I want to use. So I'm going to go over here and select all of my data, including the column title, all the way down through all of the cases. Everything else I can just leave where it is and say OK. So now Excel has added a chart, which is blank, and a table, which is also blank. Now I'm going to click on that table, and then I use this section over here on the right to construct it. I'm just going to widen that a little bit so we can see a little better what's going on. So now for the first table, what I want to do is favorable. This is going to be an analysis of how favorable people were. So I'm going to take favorable, and I'm going to drag it down to the summary values box right down there. And what it does right now is it just gives me the total sum of all the favorability scores. That's not very useful, but hold on. And then I'm going to drag condition here down to rows. So now it's expanded my table to have a separate row for each condition with the total favorability of all the people who were in each condition. That's still not what I want because I want the average, not the total. So I go down here, click the down arrow under Sum of Favorable, select Value Field Settings, and now I can say what I want in that cell. So I'm going to select the average and say OK. Presto changeo. Now we see that in the control condition, the average favorability was 2 2/3. In the endorsement, it was 2.8, and in the endorsement with picture, it was 4. So, and I get the same thing here in my chart. So my results are more or less consistent with what I expected. The endorsement helped, though not much, moving from 2 2/3 to 2.8. And the endorsement with the picture was even more effective, moving the favorability all the way up to 4. A couple more things I might do to make this look a little better. The first is I'm kicking myself that I didn't name my conditions something a little easier and cleaner. So I'm just going to edit my data here, and I'm going to do that carefully so I have a backup in case I screw it up. So first I'll say select the entire column and say copy. I'm going to go over here somewhere and then right click and say just regular old paste. Okay, so that just made a copy of those data. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to actually just edit. So for all these control condition ones, I'm just going to change this to say control. I'll copy and paste. Here I'm going to say endorse plus image. So I'm just good. This is basically just going to change how these are labeled. I want to be careful to make sure that I'm not actually pasting in the wrong spot, because that would obviously change my analysis. Endorsement. So this is just the endorsement. And again, I'm going to change all those values and paste. All right, so now I can go back to my pivot table, and I can right-click, and hopefully I can remember where I go to refresh. Analyze. Refresh. There. So that's looking better. I'll also select these, and I'm going to go to Home and just select the number formatting comma style, which means it will have 2 decimal places for all of them. Again, makes it all look better. So that's pretty good. Final thing I'd like is really, given the way my hypotheses work, I'd like these to be ordered control, endorsement, then endorsement and image. So I'm going to select this row and then move it down and just drag it down. And now I've reordered the rows in my table, and my graph magically also reorders as well. So now I've got the numbers over here. I've got a nice picture right here that I can insert right into my paper. And that's sort of annoying, so I'm going to select that little legend thing and hit delete. Just get rid of it. So there we go. And I'll relabel this as favorability. There we go. Then I can do the exact same thing again, inserting a new pivot table based on vote, which would give me a parallel analysis of voting. I'll leave that for you to do. But the one other thing I want to show you is I also want to do an analysis that separates out everything by my moderator, which is party ID. If you recall, I expect that perhaps different partisans will react differently to the endorsement given Taylor Swift's political activism. So I'm going to go back to insert. I'm going to say pivot chart, insert pivot chart and pivot table. Going to select again the same complete set of my data and say OK. So now I'm going to just get rid of this formatting thing so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to move this chart down here. So now we've got pivot table number 2. Again, I'm going to analyze favorability. I'm going to analyze the field value settings, the average of favorability. And now I'm going to separate that out by condition and also by party ID. So what this does, we'll get to the table. It says the columns are going to be the different party ID categories. The rows are going to be the different conditions. And then in here, I've got the average for each of those combinations. And so here we see in the control condition for Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and other, there were none of those. Endorsement plus image, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, others, and in the endorsement condition. So again, I'm going to select the row, move it down so we get it in a nice order. And in fact, as I look at this, I think really what I want to compare these conditions among Democrats, then I want to compare them among Republicans. So this would be better if my chart were organized the other way. So I'm going to flip party ID over to the rows and condition over to the columns. And now I get the different conditions among Democrats, the different conditions among Republicans, among Independents, and among other. And I find my hypothesis was not supported at all, because among Republicans here, the endorsement matters and the picture matters even more. That's the opposite of what I expect for Republicans. Among Democrats, the endorsement helps a little bit, but not nearly as much as it does among Republicans. The moral of that story is you should collect real data and not the fake data that I used here. Anyway, I hope this has given you what you need to at least get started on your analysis and give you some reasonably good-looking output that you can include in your paper, as well as the numbers that you can include as well. So enjoy. Okay, in this supplement, I'm going to show you quickly two things. The first is if you don't remember what values are associated with the different answers on a question, here's how you check. So for example, I wasn't sure how Democrat, Republican, Independent, Other got coded in my survey. So I go to the question, I hit this little gear icon, I say recode values, and now I see that Democrats are 1, Republicans are 2, Independents are 3, and Other is 4. So I'm good to go. I don't want to change anything here now, but I just want to look at that. I can remember that. The other possibility is if I manually change that before, there'll be this little X arrow icon, so I can do that instead. In fact, I should. And now I see here that very favorable is 5, somewhat 4, neutral 3, 2, and so on. So in this, higher values mean more favorable. That makes it easy to interpret. And while I'm here, I'll check vote as well. 3 is yes, 2 is maybe, 1 is no. So again, higher values, more favorable. All right, so that's thing 1. Thing 2 is in my pivot table or pivot chart. Here's the one I ended with before, where I've got the different values of party identification in the rows and the different conditions across the columns. Now, I might want to combine independent and other into one category, right, and get the overall average. So the way I do that is first, I'll select the two that I want to combine, I'll right-click, and I'll say Group. So what happens now is it's combined the values 3 and 4 into a single group, unhelpfully labeled Group 1, and then the others, it's left each as their own, quote, group. So the first thing I'm going to do is collapse the various groups because I don't need to see the rows within each group. And then while I'm here, I can just change those labels. So I know those are Democrats. I know these are Republicans, and I know these are independent/others. So I changed those labels, and that makes this table, of course, easier to read, and the chart also updates as well. So now I've got independents and others together in one category, and I've got all three labeled more sensibly. All right, enjoy.